I'm going to have to just reset my station because I had it set up on video and then I decided to do a YouTube live. And for some reason on YouTube, it doesn't let you place your station in the same place. So here goes an attempt to get you into the frame so that you can actually see what I'm doing. Really ridiculous because I do not like the camera at this angle at all. Does it make a difference how I do this? None whatsoever. Anyway, I digress. So I'm going to just attempt to do this as best I can for you and try and keep you in the frame. So the video that I wanted to bring you today was a knitting one for a change. And what I've made is a little jumper for a 3-year-old, and it has the squared off shoulders. So we've got a straight shoulder across the back and a straight across the front. Here's the other front, which is now completed, and I've got to obviously join those two together. Now most patterns will tell you to cast off at the end of your work. Using this method, I don't cast off. I simply put all of my stitches that I end with onto a spare needle or a hook or something else. And then I roll myself up a little bit of extra yarn as well to make this work. What I'm then going to do is bring the two together. This is the back section. I've got exactly the right number of stitches. I've left the balance of the stitches for the neck on a hook. So now I have 24 stitches here, which are for my back on the back section, and I have got 24 stitches here on the front. This happens to be the right front. And what I'm going to do is line the two up, putting that one there, and they're going to be right sides together, obviously. Gonna grab the two pieces. Going to put them right sides together. Let's see if I can move this at least a little bit more this way for you. Right, there you go. There's my front section on a needle. There's my back section on its needle as well. Kind of put the two together so that my stitches here are lined up at the neck. Doesn't matter whether you start at the neck or at the shoulder, it'll work just as well. And I'm going to use the end of this hook. The hook, I'm not crocheting, I'm knitting. And what I'm going to do is, let me just pull this needle through. That's how it should be. I've got the ends of both of my needles now with my stitches lined up. You can use a separate needle, or you can use the end of the needle coming from one of your pieces. And I am going to put my needle behind the first stitch on the first hook needle and behind the first stitch on the second needle. And I used the yarn that I kept, this extra piece, and I simply knit the two in exactly the same way you normally knit. I've now got these two stitches that need pushing off the needle. All right, so I've pushed the two stitches I've knitted together off the needle. I now go to my second stitch and I put my hook needle into the front of the next stitch and I knit them as normal, and then I slide both off. At this point, I use one of my needles to cast off. So I bring the first stitch over the second stitch and I've cast that one stitch off. So I should at all times land up with one stitch on my right needle unless I haven't done the cast off yet. So let's demonstrate again. Into the front of the stitch at the end of the needle and into the second needle stitch, yarn over and pull the yarn through and slide both stitches off. Okay, they're both off. Now got 2 stitches on my needle, and I simply pass the first one over the second one. I've now got a couple of stitches cast off already. I'm going to repeat that, pick up a stitch from each needle, knit them and pass the stitch over each other. Next stitch at the end of the needle. The only thing to be careful of with this is that you don't push the other stitches off your needle while you're doing this. Just be aware of the stitches on your other needle. So I'm knitting the stitches again, and I'm passing the one stitch over the other stitch. So my cast off edge, which is here, is getting longer and longer. That's my neck edge there. You can see there. Right, I'm going to continue with that. If this takes too long, I'll splice and cut the video and shorten it so that you don't have to watch me do all 24 stitches. But I did want to show you the whole process from beginning to end, and I could have done it just with the end, but I was worried that it would be too confusing. As it is, it may be confusing. So let's see how we go. So knitting first stitch, don't do it too tight, don't do it too loose. I think if you keep your standard usual tension, I would imagine it'll work okay. And I think the big thing with this is that you always want your front and the 2 seams, whichever they are, that you're joining, to have the same number of stitches. I believe you could probably try this if one had more stitches than the other, but you'd have to evenly pick up the stitches as you went, so more from one needle than the other. And that's what you would have to do. So we're going along here, knitting a stitch off each needle and then passing it over or casting it off, if this is the cast off method that you normally use. I've done this before in the past, and I'm trying to remember how I did it with a crochet hook. But I think I landed up with a slightly thicker seam. It looked really nice, but I wasn't sure on a tiny baby jumper, for example, whether having that bulky seam on the inside was the best idea. So here we go. Going to continue on. We're near the end. We'll pass over, knit 2 together, 1 from each needle, and cast that one off. Phew, we landed up with the right number of stitches at the end, which is great. So last stitch from each needle. And of course that one's going to give me a hard time, isn't it? So pull that through. You can now drop these 2 needles. You don't need them anymore. Well, you need one of them to cast off the last stitch. You're now done with that. I'm just going to tighten that. And I'm going to pull a loop and I'm going to pass this through just very softly. I don't want that to be very tight. And that's only because I want to make sure I like the way it looks. Now, that's what it looks like. And the lovely thing about that is that because the pattern is the same front and back, I've landed up with the pattern running very evenly and pattern matched, as we would say in the sewing world. So that's on the wrong side. Now we'll flip it over to the right side and see what it looks like and if we're happy with that. So that's what it looks like on the right side now. It would have looked a lot better if I'd actually considered where I finished the front compared to the back. Because if I'd finished it one row earlier, I wouldn't have had this extra row of stitches here, and it would have looked better. It would have actually matched a lot better. But quite considering, look how lovely that is. It's very difficult to see the stitches because they're actually part of the weave of the knit. And so for me, that is a much nicer way to do this. I think you can do this on the sides as well, and I have done that in the past. The only difference is you have to actually pick up the stitches from the sides as you go. So whereas this, you didn't cast off, so all your stitches were still on your needles. With the other way, if I was doing it down the side seam, for example, here, I'd have to pick up the stitches along the side. You could do it all before you started, or you could do one on each piece as you were going. So you'd pick up a stitch in the one side, you'd pick up a stitch on the other piece of fabric, or knitting the front and the back, and you would knit the two together and then cast it off. And that is how I would do it. So there we have what I think is a much nicer way to to join your seams. And I've now got a jumper with lovely seams where they're joined at the top, and they're even, they lie nicely, and I think that's a really nice method of doing that. So I hope that's given you just another idea of how you can do things, because seriously, there's so many ways you can do everything, aren't there? So have a wonderful evening, everybody. Take care. And I will eventually get you off. There you go. I seem to have a little glitch. For whatever reason, it will not switch off my video. So I have no idea how to end the live.
It's especially good for you, Ian, because I know you're a bit of a cheapskate. So, I'm going to set you a challenge to buy something for €40.